Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. My name is Nikki Bass and I will be bringing you thoughts, ideas and stories from some incredible guests to hopefully inspire you to live more adventurously in your everyday lives. Hello and welcome back to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. This is season 5, episode 5. Gosh, we're already halfway through the season. I can't believe it. Anyway, this week I am super excited to welcome Maggie Fennel to the show. Maggie works in environmental research and development. She specialises in green roofing. So when you see buildings with plants growing on the roofs, that's her work. She looks particularly at sort of innovative planting techniques and planning techniques, looking at how the work that she does, the plants and the greenery that she uses can have the biggest impact, both from an environmental perspective and from an aesthetic perspective too. She's a founding member of GROW, which is the UK's first green roof trade association. And she has recently worked with the West Midlands Combined Authority, looking at their national environmental plan. So I was really fascinated by Maggie's work because I think, like many of us, we may notice when town centres or city centres look beautiful because, plants, and I think particularly this time of year, spring, then there's beautiful flowers and blossoms planted everywhere. What I hadn't realised, I guess, as much was the environmental impact, how the use of plants, the clever use of green spaces can actually help things like drainage. They can help create spaces that are environmentally sound, as well as making city centres feel like places that you want to spend time in. And I think now, with so much of the emphasis on green and blue spaces and what they can do for our mental health and our well-being, I think Maggie's work has become even more important. And I first came across Maggie because we happened to be both speaking at the same TEDx, which was TEDx Moseley back in January. And Maggie gave an incredibly brilliant, powerful talk all about how we value the priceless, really looking at how we value nature alongside things that have a sort of a price tag or a material value to them, more obviously. I highly encourage you to go and listen to the TED Talk, but obviously decided that I had to follow up and speak to Maggie for the show as well, because I was really interested in the work that she did. So Maggie, welcome to the show. It's so brilliant to have you here. I think probably the first thing is if you could just share a little bit about what your role, and not just the sort of the job itself, I guess, but where your sort of passion for nature and the environment comes from and how that's integrated into the work that you do.
Well, I always quite liked the outdoor environment, although I guess compared to a lot of other guests, I'm probably a bit more of an indoors person, a little bit bookish and quite quiet. But the point that clicked for me really was when I spent a year living in Mexico as part of my degree. So I did Spanish and classics degree. I spent a year living in Mexico and then realised actually having, seen a little bit more of the world and lived with some amazing people and got a bit more understanding of the real impact of environmental issues. At that point, I thought, I really want to do something for the environment. However, I'm 3/4 of the way through a Spanish degree and have done nothing to do with environmental science. So I had a little bit of a diverse career path, you might say, and eventually ended up in a place where I found a job that was basically setting up a project between a university and a nursery, selling plants, not looking after kids. And I sort of took it as a bit of a gamble, but what I quickly realised, both within that project, sort of communicating between the university and the nursery, and then wider sort of getting plants out into the industry, is it's quite like a translation exercise. But language is so important. And when you've got a lot of different industries and disciplines and professionals all working in their little bubble, it does take quite a lot to break through that. And particularly when you've got a new type of product like green roofing, people are used to selling plants and planting plants. People are used to doing roofs. Horticulturalists and roofers don't really have any other occasion to talk to each other. So it did turn out to be quite an unexpected but positive use of a language degree to say, actually, it's really important to get these messages out, not just in a clear way, but in a way that is useful to a whole variety of different people. And once you start delving into the construction industry, there's landscape architects and developers and quantity surveyors and a whole bunch of people who need different information about the thing you're doing, particularly when it's new and they're not used to it. So there's a kind of a dual interest for me. One is on the actual environmental impact and what is this doing? How is this making things better? And the other is the communication side. How do you get this message across to a load of different people who are almost talking slightly different languages? They all say they're talking English, but we've all got our own kind of jargon in a profession, haven't we?
No, absolutely. And it's so interesting when you say that, because I was just thinking back to the TED Talk, which obviously I'm going to put a link in the notes so that people can go and see it if they haven't already. But that point about how you take something that's quite complex and can also either be considered sort of quite niche, or particularly I think when it comes to the environment, can feel like you're being, you tend to have people who are obviously very actively engaged and want to make changes and do things and protect the environment. And then you will also have those who feel that they are already struggling enough with everything else that's going on and feel that they're being told to do something or being preached to in a way. And I think what was really interesting about your message was how you clarified that. And I guess I love that parallel you make with a language degree as well. Coming from a language background myself, it is so much about, and I was just thinking that you can be speaking English to someone else and the message gets lost so easily as well. I mean, what do you find, because I think that there's been so much research recently, I think, about the importance of green spaces, of, even plants indoors can have a positive impact on our mental health, and trying to create spaces, particularly in cities where those green spaces are rarer. I mean, what are some of the barriers or the challenges that you come across with doing the work that you do that people, whether it's resistance, whether it's time, money, those sort of things? I mean, what are some of the things that you encounter?
There are time, money, and those kind of things are definitely in there. And I would sort of summarize a sort of accumulation of the barriers as the struggle to do something new that people don't already understand. It's just quite a big jump. And you get this a bit with green roofs, a bit with green walls. I think most people sort of understand parks. So, you'll have your standard, we know what a park is. If we've been to a park, that's fine. And there's a separate set of barriers around there on the cost of maintenance. So there's one thing, which is there tends to be more enthusiasm for building a new thing or creating a new space than there is for looking after an existing space for the way people's budgets work. So that's the one basic one. But in terms of putting in some of these new technologies, I think there's a balance that's really hard to strike between enthusiasm for trying something new and innovative and responsible budget management in terms of, we can't just fling money at every new shiny thing that comes our way. And also that wrapping together of all the different environmental considerations. So it takes a certain amount of energy and resource to grow plants and put them in a certain place. And you need to make sure that you're doing that in the right way, that it's not wasteful, it's not, to delve a little bit deeper, there's a consideration about social fairness and community involvement. So you're not causing gentrification. And one of the examples of something that's sometimes used to promote green roofs and green spaces is that it'll lift the property prices, which is great for developers and people selling those properties, not necessarily great for people who are struggling to afford rents. So it's trying to wrap all of these social and environmental considerations together is quite complex, and it can be quite daunting. And, you need a certain amount of balance between, you can't just be too scared to do new stuff, and you can't, hold back too much from these things that we really desperately need. But also you need to be able to try something, critically analyze it, and say, okay, maybe these are the bits we could do better next time. And when you've got an industry or a I guess, an arena with so many different people that are competing. I think people find that quite hard to do. There are a lot of people who do try it and who do manage quite well, but I've given you a whole array of things there, but I guess I would put that down to those struggles of when you're going to try something and go for something new, just trying to make sure that you're doing it right. And you don't have a guarantee if something's new, you don't have historical evidence for that. So it's quite a sort of process of building trust, really, between a lot of people.
No, that's really interesting, isn't it? I think, that point you make, it's sort of like unintended consequences as well. And that thing of, okay, so we, on the surface, who could object to the idea of more green roofs or more nature within that environment? But then, like you say, actually what that then does to the environment, the impact on the people in it and the communities, and I guess reinforcing potentially social or financial divides and that side of things. Actually, that's fascinating, and it has to be said, it's not something I'd ever considered. So I can see how you're having to balance those different things. And I think it, in a way, going back to my original point, it sort of sits partly at the heart of the whole, I guess, green or climate change debate. Is at what point is it sustainable? What point does it, even if in long term it has the beneficial impact, actually for where people are right now with their own lives, how do you convince or make it manageable for people to be able to bear? I think it's fascinating. I was just wondering for you as well, from a point of working in this sort of space, working so closely with nature in a way, but also coming up against the human element. I mean, what are some of the benefits that that these spaces can bring, but also that you've personally benefited from? I mean, what has the work that you've done brought to you in a personal sense?
That's an amazing question. And I think there's a lot of benefits that I've gained almost unconsciously from working in a nursery. I mean, it's 40-acre site. We've got horses on one side and sheep on the other, and I can do a mile walk around the nursery in my lunch break looking at all these lovely plants, which is fantastic, good for my physical and mental health. And at the same time, when I'm sitting back in my office doing research about a view of plants and access to plants and spending time with plants increases your productivity by this percent, and here are some of the criteria and all the sort of physical and mental well-being, you just think, yeah, it's true. And I think particularly during lockdown, I was furloughed for about 4 months and definitely drew on that quite a lot in that time too. I think so many people discovered this for themselves anyway. You don't necessarily need to read a blog or an article about plants are good for your mental health. But it is just interesting when you find how much evidence is accumulating for that, and say, yeah, actually, if I'm stressed and I go for a walk outside, it does help to clear my head. And people have measured this. It lowers people's blood pressure. It reduces the amount of cortisol, which is a stress hormone in their bloodstream. So there's increasing medical evidence for this as well. So you're getting really interesting trials of things like prescription gardening and social prescribing, and can we build this into a healthcare system that prevents problems rather than treating them after they've happened?
No, I as you were saying that, I was thinking, I guess done some volunteering with the Wave Project and in sort of looking at blue spaces and that whole idea of social prescribing, that the benefits. And I think, like you said, you don't necessarily need to read the research to know the benefits, but actually having the research really helps in order to be able to make it accessible, because then it gives concrete evidence for people who maybe are managing between budgets or thinking about, what's likely to work, how do you prove that? Actually having that research evidence, I think, is so vital as a sort of, what's the word, as a catalyst, or in order to propel something forward and see it gather momentum. And I've certainly seen that in some of the work that's gone on with blue spaces over the last 2 or 3 years, even though for years, anybody who spends time in the water knows what a difference it makes. Actually, once that research is in place, it becomes like a loop with that too. In your, given your expertise and your background, how, and I think when, just before we came on, I was saying to you about, what I loved about the TED talk that you did was was that it wasn't necessarily telling people what to do, but that it raised some questions about how to think about what we value as much as anything. And I was just wondering, in terms of taking this forward and opening up that sort of, I guess, conversation around the importance of green spaces and how we balance those difficult financial considerations as well. What's your sort of thoughts on that? What's your advice? Where would you like to see this go?
Wow, that's a really interesting question, because there's so many channels that it's already operating on. And quite a lot of my basis for this TEDx talk was having delved into some of the technical side of it, the Environment Bill, COP26, and the various streams of social media conversation that swirl around this. There's lots of really complex and technical stuff that does need to happen. And I like finding out about it. It's really important. And I have huge respect for the people doing that. But I just think there's another level at which there's a huge swathe of the population that are never going to understand that level of detail and technical stuff. And when you see news coverage of things like COP26 that are really important, sort of landmark events, it can feel a little bit baffling. And you've kind of got that on one side, and you've got amazing David Attenborough documentaries on the other side, where people do genuinely care and do want to do something. And you just think, I've stopped using plastic straws, but that doesn't feel like enough. So I think it's just a bit of a meeting in the middle. And the TEDx talk was a bit of a baby step towards that, really, just to say, well, a lot of people disagree on technical elements of how this should work and whether it's good enough or whether it goes far enough and how it connects. But a thing that I see a lot of people agreeing on is that one of the most important things is to root this in local communities and to give people empowerment over how it's implemented. So you're not giving somebody a beautiful ornamental park if what they need is a sports ground, or you're not giving them a sports ground if that's actually going to take away a community space. Do you know what I mean? There's so many different ways you can implement these things. Green roofing is one particular tool that is handy because it doesn't take up space away from other things. But when you look at the whole picture, it just needs to be expressed in a way that gives people enough of the tools and the information to engage with the conversation. And it's quite a tricky thing to do, but I just think every little attempt to do that, hopefully, just brings people into that conversation and stops them feeling disconnected. And what you said before exactly is right. It's not having something done to you, not having something, we've greened your neighbourhood, whether you like it or not. That's not the point. And you know, there are wild spaces and interventions that are really necessary. But sometimes, you know, if you've got a river widening or improvement exercise, it's not about saying, well, we need to do this. It's an environmental concern. It's just like, well, how can the community benefit? How can you get involved? How's it creating jobs? All these kind of things. And then, you know, what this is actually protecting your properties from flooding, which is pretty important. And just joining those dots, which with all the different people involved, I think it is tricky, but actually there's some great examples of how people are doing this now, and communications charts and some of the regional authority and local authority things are really trying to tap into this now, I think.
Yeah, that's such an important point, isn't it? About that, you know, it working at a local level, it feeling directly relevant and manageable. I think there's such, particularly at the moment with everything that's going on in the world, that feeling that something's achievable and manageable, but is also making a difference. Because it's very easy to get sort of disheartened or to feel like, well, I've, like I said, I'm doing this recycling, but actually on the grand scale, and you see the David Attenborough stuff, you're like, oh my goodness. So yeah, I mean, if someone's listening to this and they think, actually, I really, you know, I do what I can, but I would love to have more of an impact, whether it's in my neighborhood or whether it's just in my own sort of sphere of my house or my own life, what's one piece of advice you'd give them with that?
I think this is very subjective. So it depends very much on what element of it really inspires you. But I find a bit of it that really fascinates you or that you engage with. If it's plants, then brilliant. Do a window box or something in your garden. There's loads of stuff you can do around that. But if it's anything to do with nature, anything to do with water or activity. There are so many groups out there, like wildlife trusts and volunteering opportunities, local little Friends of Parks groups, if you want to engage with the local community. There's just so much out there. And I've definitely sort of decided for myself that I need to engage with local community groups. I used to be really good at setting up a local community energy company and stuff when I lived in a different part of the city. But actually, just find the bit that is your next little everyday adventure, almost, to quote your talk, that thing that's going to give you a little bit of a buzz, a little bit of butterflies in the stomach, and that's going to get you either outside or bringing some of that nature and some of that plant life inside. My husband has just managed to stick a little bird feeder box onto the window of his office, partly because it's the only place the squirrels can't get to, but also it's just that little bit of engagement every day.
Oh no, I love that. I think I was just thinking my parents they're having a constant battle with the squirrels and the bird feeder. It just made me laugh. But actually it's so much fun because every time we go there, we just sit and watch like the squirrel doing acrobatics, trying to unentangle the latest device that they've created to stop them getting it. But like you said, it's those little engagements as well, those little, almost the details that we don't notice about the natural world. So, you know what, I was just thinking back to that point you made about with gravel and trying to find ways to combine the man-made or the bits that we sort of need to make our environment functional with that bit of actually, where can nature come in? Where can you allow it? Where can you notice it? And how that's, you know, when you focus on that, it becomes more of it becomes more noticeable and more important.
You know what, it's really funny, the difference between trying to do that in a built-up city area compared to wild spaces that you would get outside in the countryside. And the one thing that I got slightly fascinated by looking on social media channels doing this kind of thing is these little community groups that want to tidy up and pick up litter and, you know, keep Britain tidy type things. One of the things that I noticed people doing quite a lot, and this is one of those points of contention, is pulling out all the weeds that you see growing along the roadside. And you'll get a couple of people going, no, they're great for wildlife, the bees are feeding on them. And you'll get other people going, oh, that is messy. And I do think there's, like, people's boundaries are in slightly different places, but there's a certain element of when something's really wild in a place that you don't expect it, but there's a really strong association with it feeling unloved and neglected and decaying. And so a weed in a particular place where you think it really shouldn't be is offensive to people. And unless you're really keen on the kind of, you know, biodiversity everywhere possible. So there's just that element of making space intentionally for nature and for plants. And there's lots of little places where, you know, imagine a traffic island that you could, you know, plant up intentionally, just making improvements in a way that feels loved and feels intended and designed. And there are loads of nice little wild nature reserve places within the city, but they have a little label on saying this is a nature reserve. Don't worry, we haven't forgotten about it. It's intended to be wild. And I just think that psychology is really interesting. It's like, oh, okay, I know this is supposed to be wild. We can have weeds there, that's okay.
That's so fascinating. I was just thinking we've got a little local park up the road with where the count. I mean, it's literally next to the council, and it's small, but it's, you know, it's got lots of variety of trees and it's very well looked after. And last summer they put up a sign going, "We're deliberately not mowing this for the bees. It's okay." And like you said, that psychological aspect. I had a battle with myself in the garden the other day. I was going around deadheading things, and I was so relieved at the end because it looked lovely. And then at the same time, I was like, oh, but when you accidentally cut off something that's starting to grow, or it's really, the more you think about it, actually, the harder it becomes, I think.
This is the danger where you can strive for a level of perfection that is never attainable. And for the most part, I think if you've got a good intention and you're trying to do the right thing, I mean, there are still all kinds of minefields that you can probably trip up on. But if you think about it too much, I think this is where it just keeps coming back to the conversation. You'll have a conversation with somebody at some point and say, oh, do you know that actually that thing you think is really brilliant is actually detrimental to this other thing you hadn't thought of? And you go, oh no. Never mind, carry on anyway. Talk to more people, you'll find those out quicker.
Absolutely. So it comes back to your point, I guess.
Rather than feeling intimidated by it.
And I suppose it goes back to your point about actually it's so personal and subjective in a way that actually you've got to navigate your own boundaries around it. What feels comfortable, what feels possible as much as anything, what feels manageable, but also keeping that positive intention, that finding out information, and that's always important, but also, the little things can add up, make a difference. And I think that's what's so, bringing back to that sort of starting point about the work that you do, actually, though, the green roofs or when you notice the plants going up the side of the buildings and things can make such a huge positive impact from how you feel about a building, let alone going on to think about the actual benefits it brings in terms of the wider aspects. And I think, it's what you can do with those little spaces, what you can do within your own patch, I suppose, that makes a difference. Maggie, that's been absolutely amazing. I could witter on about this for hours. I find, like you said, that once you start pulling at a thread, then so many more bits emerge. And I guess that's why you love your work as well. If people want to find out more about what you do or, visit you, where can they go? Where can they find out?
Well, I'm mostly active on LinkedIn, I have to say. So Maggie Fennel, and you should probably find me like that. We have a bit of a website at work and through the Green Roof Organisation. So there's greenrooforganisation.org or there's boningale.co.uk, which are work websites. And I have a little bit of, I'm afraid my Twitter activity is mostly snooping on other people, but I do occasionally say things of interest if I find them. So my slightly daft Twitter handle is @HobbitHolesAreUs. But if you look up Maggie Fennel, then you find me on there too.
If it makes you feel better, literally 90% of my guests come on and apologize about their Twitter account. So it's fine. You're in very good company, mine included. But no, I'll pop all of those links in the show notes so people can go and find it. And like you said, if they want to find out more about the green roofing and the work that you do, then obviously those links will be really handy too. And clearly I will put in your wonderful TED talk as well, so people can go and have a listen to that, which I highly, highly encourage, just to get you thinking slightly differently about nature and how we think about it. Maggie, thank you so much again. That has been so brilliant. And yeah, wish you every luck with carrying on your greenification and with all the work that you're doing as well. It's really amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nikki. It's been so much fun.
Take care. Bye. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Maggie. This week, I'd just like to pick up on Maggie's point she made about how you open up conversations, because I think that's something that comes through a lot when we talk about how, whether it's us as individuals starting a new adventure and being told, well, that's not going to happen, or feeling like the naysayers are out there, or whether it is about something we feel really passionate about, but then come up against barriers or people's resistance or defensiveness to it, and how we open up those conversations around including people in the conversation. I think what I really like about Maggie's approach is that it's a suggestion and it's an idea and it's a start point for a discussion, more than it is a prescription or, you must do this in order for this to happen. I think, naturally as human beings, when we get told to do something, our defense mechanisms go up and we tend to push back at it. It can feel like a challenge to our identity sometimes, or who we are. And absolutely there is a right time for being direct and calling things out. But it's also about, I think, how do you hold the space for a continued dialogue, for a continued conversation when those barriers do come up? How do you find that common ground? And I think that's something that Maggie illustrated, talking about how, in a way she acts as a translator between different groups as to how, trying to bridge that gap really. Anyway, that's just my thoughts for this week around, how we keep dialogue going when it feels like there are polarized opinions or there are good or bad ways to be. And that can close things off sometimes too. And how do you find the balance with that? Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts. Please do, as always, get in touch. You can find me on Instagram, Resilience at Work or Everyday Adventure Pod. You can find me on Facebook in the Everyday Adventure Club or Resilience at Work. Find me on LinkedIn, Nikki Bass, or get in touch via my website, resiliencework.co.uk. The other fantastic news that I would love to share with you is that the podcast, the Everyday Adventure podcast, is now part of the Tremula Network, which is super exciting. It has been set up by my wonderful editor, Francesca Tarauskis. And Fran is also the host of the Seize Your Adventure pod and On the Outside. And also part of this network is World for Scotland, which is a wonderful podcast focused on Scotland and traveling there. So it's very exciting development to now be part of this network. I do absolutely encourage you to look up the other podcasts and give them a listen too. But yeah, love to know what you think. Please do get in touch. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do leave a review or on your favorite platform. It all helps. And otherwise, I will be taking a 2-week break. So we'll be back again in a couple of weeks' time. Episode 5, time for a little pause and reset. But I have an absolutely incredible guest and friend of this show to share with you. So please do stay tuned. Make sure you click follow so you don't miss out. And yeah, I'll be back in again in a couple of weeks' time with another incredibly inspiring guest. So I look forward to speaking to you then. Take care. Bye.